Hello, it's Regina. Welcome back to my haunted library. Welcome to Slow Burn Sunday. I'm just having a laid back Sunday, hanging out with my friends Catnip and Drunken. So, we're talking about Magic, the movie starring Anthony Hopkins and Burgess Meredith and Ann-Margret that came out in '78 based on the book Magic by William Goldman. There he is. He sold this for $1 million, which was a nice chunk of change back in the late '70s. So Magic came out in 1978. I do remember seeing it, not at the drive-in. I went on a date, and I remember we both really liked this movie and went to the soda shop afterwards and discussed it. It's a psychological horror film starring Anthony Hopkins, Ann-Margret, and Burgess Meredith. And it was directed by Richard Attenborough, who is a great director, and you really see his chops in this movie. And sometimes the best directors are the ones that don't call attention to their direction. I mean, there are some great like auteurs who do that. You're like, oh, that's a Tarantino shot or that's a Scorsese thing, but this is just like solid filmmaking. This story is about, and there will be spoilers, is about a man named Corky who is a I'll just talk about the film. The book is pretty much the same thing, a few differences, but so at the beginning of the story, we see Corky reporting back to his mentor, a sick older magician named Merlin. And this is in the book too. It gets a little more involved in the book. And Corky is very talented, but he just has terrible stage fright. And it shows him kind of like humiliating himself in front of a crowd. It's sort of like an open mic type of thing. And then we flash forward, and suddenly he has a new act where he's still his own nervous self, but he's brought in this ventriloquist dummy named Fats, who is kind of like heckling him, and they're kind of playing off each other. And it's a huge hit. Everyone loves it. Everyone loves Fats. And Fats becomes his like alter ego. So that's really quickly established. And in the movie, it's really brilliant because Anthony Hopkins is such a good actor. And it's nice to see him in this movie when he's very young. And he's playing the voice of Fats. And whoever designed the dummy did an incredible job making it look like Anthony Hopkins, but also kind of making it look like its own entity. And you really believe watching this, you do forget that this is a dummy. And that is, I think, one of the greatest strengths of the film is that Fats has this incredible character. He's funny, he's crude, he's telling dirty jokes. He's the id, if you want to call it that, of Corky, who's very shy. Burgess Meredith plays the agent who is going to really help Corky get into the big time. And he's this cigar chomping, guy who drives a Rolls Royce. And Corky's going with it, but when he mentions that he has to get a medical exam, he balks. And he gets freaked out and leaves town and goes to the Catskills where he's from. And he stops, and it's kind of like in the wintertime, he stops at this place where they rent cabins, but because it's off season, he doesn't there's not a lot of people there. And the woman who's running the cabins, who owns it, is his old flame, played by Ann-Margret. So Burgess Meredith's character's name's Ben Green, and they call him Gangrene, or like Fats calls him Gangrene, and Ann-Margret plays Peg. So Peg is like the cheerleader, the girl that every guy wanted to date in high school. Now she's older. She's a little more, she's married the guy right out of high school. They don't really have a happy marriage. And Corky was always in love with her. And Duke, her husband, is away hunting. And she's just kind of a lonely housewife. And she and Corky have an affair. And I really like this film because it's very much like a grown-up film. And the emotions seem very real, like this crush, and of course you're dealing with really great actors, so that helps. But this kind of crush that Corky's had for Peg, you really feel this, and these two kind of come together, and it's kind of like a sad love affair because Peg is reluctant to leave her husband. She feels guilty. especially when Duke comes back and the two men kind of square off. So as this drama is happening, there's another drama because Fats is not having any of this. He is intensely jealous of Peg. He doesn't want Corky to have a relationship independent of him. So this is very much a psychological thriller where Corky he's insane, he's schizophrenic, and it's through this puppet that he's able to communicate his inner kind of demon in a way. Or Fats becomes a demon as he's neglected by Corky, as Corky tries to break away. So you see this intense battle going on between Corky and himself, which is Fats. But then there's also kind of this sense that there's a supernatural element to it that is left a little open-ended by the ending, which I'll get to. So Burgess Meredith, Gangrene, shows up in the Catskills. He finds him. He drives up in his Rolls Royce, and he walks in on, and there's this amazing scene. He walks in on this scene where Corky and Fats are having an argument. So this whole time he's like having this argument with himself or with this dummy Fats. Gangrene's watching and he's like, "Oh man, I didn't realize you're no wonder you didn't want to take that physical. You're sick and we need to get you help." And he tries to leave and Corky panics because he's like, "Oh, he's going to be exposed. His mental illness is going to be exposed." And it's just so good. It's really just done so well, and it has so much, it's very heartfelt, and you really feel for Corky in this situation. There's that thing when someone tries to confront someone's, whether it's their madness or their, addiction or whatever it is, before they're ready to deal with it, they can react in a very psychotic kind of way, which he does. So Fat says, you're going to let him get away? He's browbeating him the whole time. And this goes back to Corky's abusive childhood, which they allude to very slightly in the film, but it's much more in depth in the book. And he's like, "Use me!" So I'm just going to use Drunken here. So he goes out with Corky and beats Gangrene to death with the puppet. So he's using his id in a way as the instrument of death. Burgess Meredith is beaten and not quite dead. And there's this great scene where he's going to drag his body into the lake. And he comes alive again and attacks him. And, and then he kind of does the same thing with Duke. And in a really good scene of done so well where the puppet looks like it's really doing the killing, but it's actually Corky behind the curtain. But the way it's shot and the way it's dealt with, it's so good. And then in the final part of the film, he's going to kill Corky, as Fats is going to kill Ann-Margret because she is threatening their relationship. And Corky turns, rather than kill her, he turns the knife on himself. And in a really beautiful, really sad scene, I mean, you kind of have to feel for these two guys, Fats and Corky. And it's, like I said, it's done so well. And because of Anthony Hopkins' incredible acting, I can't imagine your average actor pulling this off. And they both die. But then, and this is different from the book. The book doesn't end this way. And I don't know if it really works in the movie. At the very end, Peg comes up to the cabin and in a twist decides that, well, she is going to leave her husband. And he's already dead, but she doesn't know that. And run off with Corky. But Corky's already gone at this point. But there's this moment where she, the last line in the film, she talks in this kind of Fats voice. So there's almost the feeling that Fats has now gone into her. So definitely check out Magic, the film and the book. It's a great slow burn for a Sunday afternoon. I watched it on Shudder, and it has a lovely print of it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So let's hear what Matilda has to say. Well, I did enjoy this movie. I especially like the racy parts. But isn't it a little bit far-fetched, Regina, to think that someone could have some crazy alter ego inside them? Is it? Okay, well, thanks for stopping by our haunted library, and we'll see you next week on Slow Burn Sunday. Bye!